Okay, and we'll get started now. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Tricycle's online practice session today. My name is Amanda. I'm Tricycle's production assistant. And our guest teacher today is Dr. Pilar Jennings. So to give a quick bio, Pilar is an author and a psychoanalyst in private practice with a focus on the clinical applications of Buddhist meditation. She's been working with patients and their families through the Harlem Family Institute since 2004, and she's the author of To Heal a Wounded Heart, The Transformative Power in Buddhism and Psychotherapy in Action. So I want to give a few notes about our call today before handing it over. So we're on a Zoom webinar, so participant audio and video are off, and we're recording the session for anyone who's unable to attend this live. So you can review the recordings as well as the schedule for upcoming sessions at tricycle.org/live. And our next session is next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we're offering these sessions for free, and we appreciate any donations that people are able to give to help us continue providing these opportunities to connect with teachers like Pilar during these challenging times right now. So if you're able to, you can donate at tricycle.org/donate. And finally, we'll have some time for Q&A towards the end of the call. So you can post your questions in the Q&A panel that's accessible through the button below the video screen. And we'll try and get to as many questions as possible towards the end of the call, which should go on for about an hour. And if you're tuning in from Facebook Live, you can post a question in the comment section on Facebook, and then we'll add it to the list. And that's all from me. Thank you so much, Pilar, for being with us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And hello, everybody. It's so good to be with you. As we were leading up to beginning this hour, I was seeing that you're joining us from all over the world, from the Netherlands, from Mexico, from Barcelona, all over the United States. And so I am delighted and grateful that Tricycle has found a way to bring us together in Detroit. So as I was thinking about this time that we'd have together, I thought I would say a few words about our experience of suffering, and in particular, how this crisis that we're in is generating for so many people throughout the world an understandable fear of suffering. Because the suffering that we're experiencing is so far-reaching, right? It is touching every aspect of our lives, and it's not impacting us all in the same way. But there are people throughout this world who are experiencing every form of suffering imaginable. Psychiatric suffering, socioeconomic suffering, physical suffering, societal suffering, and so much loss. So I thought I would just start by noting that, interestingly, the historical Buddha suggested that even though fear tends to be very powerful, it's not intrinsic to the mind. And that can be interesting just to consider right alongside the reality that we all have the biological capacity for fear. Fear is basically a danger signal. Right? It indicates that something threatening is getting closer, and that we need to be alert. And so we can really just be curious about this spiritual approach to fear, and in particular fear of suffering, which wants to challenge the way we experience fear, alongside some respect that we do need it as a way to navigate especially acute suffering or crisis. Now, the tricky thing about fear, and probably you've all had personal experiences that might indicate this challenge, is that when fear becomes too pronounced, when it starts to become inflamed, and especially in those deeper roots of the psyche, it's very hard for the mind to stay supple. It's very hard to stay curious and reflective and to utilize our resources of intelligence and inquiry in order to better understand the causes of our suffering. Yeah. And this is an issue that's emphasized in Buddhist teachings of all kinds that want to suggest if we can reorient from our experience of suffering to the causes of suffering, it has a tendency to free up the mind so that we're able to restore a sense of relative ease. Of course, if we're suffering acutely, it's never easy. But if we can help the mind start to feel that sense of fluidity, then we're going to have more of a feeling of agency, a sense that we can enter into the suffering. We can find a way to navigate it without having to push it away, right? Without having to get rid of it immediately, but to just notice what's contributing to it. Yeah. So you've probably been thinking quite a bit about what's caused our current suffering and the various forms of suffering, because again, the situation is so extreme, so grave for so many people, that it is really calling us to think carefully about why we're suffering, the various forms of suffering, and again, how to work with the fear so that we're able to get a little bit closer to it on behalf of countless beings. And so as I was thinking about our conversation today, I was reflecting on our great spiritual ancestors and our great poetic mystics. And they all have a way of doing something very similar, which is that they tend to reorient from the ways in which other people fail to show up or fail to navigate suffering skillfully to the causes and conditions for healing. And this is why they offer us such inspiration. And I was very struck by that as I was thinking about talking with you today, because it occurred to me that when our suffering becomes acute and our fear of suffering can begin to ratchet up, it's tempting to get fixated on how others disappoint us. Yeah. And I understand, I deeply understand why, because when there's opportunity to respond to suffering and those who have resources to do so fail to do so, it's painful. It's painful. But I'm feeling curious, and I feel curious about myself, and I feel curious about our collective capacity to keep reorienting toward what's going to usher in well-being and recovery. And in the Buddha Dharma, we have methods to help us do that, to help restore a sense of, again, fluidity and suppleness of thought, of mind, of heart, so that we can free up all of our resources and use them to reduce suffering. So in Buddhist practice, the healing method, interestingly, and this is true across traditions, it starts with the body, even though there's an interesting critique, sometimes understandably leveled against Buddhist practice, that it's disembodied. But really what we do is we start with bringing more awareness to the breath. We do this in all the Mahayana traditions and the Theravadan traditions of working with the breath, so that even if the mind is feeling riled and tight and contracted, we can help the nervous system start to feel a little more calibrated. And when the body starts to feel an increased sense of well-being and relative safety, the mind tends to follow. And so I encourage you all, many of you have a practice, but if you're noticing the waves of agitation and anxiety, frustration as we go through this crisis, to appeal to the breath to help you restore a sense of well-being. And we can do this in multiple ways. One way is to really deepen our inhalations, then allow for some gentle breath holding, and then really deepen the exhalation so that we're both bringing more awareness to the cycle of breath, but again, actively helping the nervous system discharge the stressors that might be building. And then as the body starts to settle, there are many ways that we can work lovingly with the mind and the heart. But one method that feels particularly apt for this situation is the teaching and the practice of equanimity, which I have found to be such a profound and extremely effective method, which is a way of helping us begin to develop the ability to sustain some relative stability of mind and heart, regardless of our circumstances. It's a pretty tall order, right? When you think about what we're going through now. And again, some people are not so personally impacted, and others are suffering extreme loss and wrenching loss. And for those of you who might be, I join you in the devastation, but also the difficulty of sustaining that relatively stable mind, which doesn't mean that we won't have a lot of feelings. Of course we will. But with the practice of equanimity, we're really learning how to hold what we're feeling, whatever it might be, with deep patience, spaciousness, and respect. Yeah. And then as we continue to work with this teaching of equanimity, we use it as a way to cultivate a feeling of visceral connection with all beings. And this is, of course, a difficult teaching because we all have biases of some kind, whether we're conscious of them or not. And many of us find that it's easier to express compassion. It's easier to free up our fear of suffering and actively express compassion for the people we love or the people we have harmonious relationship with. And it becomes much harder to do that on behalf of people we don't have any personal affiliation with. But it is, of course, that group that we most need to support, because we don't personally know the vast majority of people who populate this world. And then as we continue practicing equanimity, we also work, at least internally, at least within the mind and heart, with the people we've had real difficulty with, the people who may have caused us harm, or the people whose values and perspectives do not align with our own. And this is a very challenging teaching, but it is a way to keep nurturing our own capacity to respond to suffering and to recognize that it's a central part of our human experience, is both the capacity to suffer, but also the wish to do whatever we can to eliminate the suffering. So lastly, and then we'll do some practice together. Those of you who know me know that I have tremendous reverence for all of the symbolic Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that we practice with in the Tibetan tradition. And I have a deep reverence for the image of green Tara, who is thought to be both a bodhisattva and a Buddha. And one of the things that I love about green Tara, and again, for me, it's very relevant to this current predicament, is that she's thought to be in a dancing pose. So she has one leg extended outward, symbolizing her wish to join you and all beings in their suffering. And she has one leg tucked inward, representing her commitment to working steadfastly, lovingly with her own experience, her own suffering. But that dancing pose represents the ability to stay dynamic, to stay connected, both to ourselves and to others, so that when we most need to respond with compassion, with determination, with patience, we're ready and we're able to. So, since we have a short period of time together, I thought we would do some practice. And since the theme of our conversation for today is the fear of suffering, we'll do a brief period of what's called Tonglen, which is a traditional Tibetan practice. Tonglen means giving and taking. And it's a way to slowly and gently challenge the tendency to want to get distance from suffering. Again, it's usually true of our own suffering and the suffering of others. And to start to feel an increased capacity to open to it, to work with it and understand it. So I can't see you. I wish that I could. But as we're easing into some practice together, I invite you to take a few moments just to find a posture that helps you feel an increased sense of comfort and ease. And perhaps just making any adjustments that would be helpful for your body and your mind. Wherever you might be sitting, if it's in a chair or on some cushions, you can take a few moments just to feel a sense of spaciousness throughout the back of the body, helping the back of the neck begin to elongate. Your hands can be gently resting on your thighs or cupped right up at the top of the thighs. And your eyes can be gently closed. If at any point you notice you're feeling a little sleepy, you can Open them slightly just to let some light in. Allowing all the muscles in the face to begin to relax. The jaw, the throat. Just allowing that sense of decompression to begin to drop down throughout the entire body. If you notice any ambient sounds, you can just allow them to wash over you. And then you can gently bring your awareness to the breath, taking in some slow, deep inhalations, and releasing the breath with fullness and ease. Just allowing each cycle of inhalations and exhalations to help you feel more connected to the body, both more relaxed and more energized. And then at your own pace, you can begin to call to mind a personal experience of suffering. It could be some aspect of this current crisis, or it could be something that you have already lived through and survived. And just notice the nature of the suffering. Perhaps notice some feelings of tenderness on your own behalf. Some affection for the part of you that suffered. And as you're evoking this suffering, you can begin to breathe it in deep into your heart center. You can imagine a beautiful, brilliant, healing flame that safely absorbs this suffering. And then breathe out whatever it is you are most needing to alleviate the suffering. With a sense of bounty and generosity. For these next few inhalations and exhalations, you can continue to breathe in the suffering. And breathe out whatever would alleviate the suffering. And as you're doing so, you can begin to call to mind someone whom you love, someone whom you cherish, who you imagine might have suffered in a similar way. And again, just notice the depths of feeling you have for this person. The affection you feel, the warmth. And notice too any tenderness you might feel as you evoke their suffering. And again, you can begin to breathe in their suffering deep into your heart center, absorbing it in this healing flame, and exhaling to them with greatest generosity and ease, whatever would help them feel better, feel safer, feel relieved of the suffering. Really notice your heart beginning to deepen and expand as you feel yourself receiving the nature of this suffering, absorbing it in your deepest resources of love and compassion, and generously offering whatever might be needed. As you begin to then call to mind an ever-growing body of people who might be suffering in a very similar way. Just visualize them joining you in this time of practice. As you begin to take in for all of you the nature of this suffering deep within your heart center, and release to all of you whatever is most needed to skillfully respond to and alleviate this suffering. You can visualize people you have seen in your neighborhood but don't know well. People who you've read about but haven't met. Really just allow the mind and the heart to begin to hold an increasing number of people throughout this world. And perhaps also including one or two people with whom you've had some difficulty, some conflict. Who might also have been touched by this suffering. So you begin to breathe in for all beings who are joining you. The nature of this suffering, absorbing it deep within your heart, and exhaling to all of you whatever will alleviate and even eliminate the suffering. And as you're doing so, you can begin to visualize your entire body transforming into a beautiful, vibrant, wish-fulfilling gem, beautiful sapphire, slightly larger than your body, that emits in all directions the healing rays of light. And as you are feeling and offering this beautiful blue healing light, you can begin to imagine that your wish-fulfilling gem can manifest as food for the hungry, as safe shelter for the homeless, as needed medicine for the sick, as a wise mother for the motherless, as a caring father for the fatherless. As a loving friend for the lonely. And as a radiant and abiding source of compassion for all beings everywhere who are suffering, in need of care, love, increased safety, and ease. Thank you everyone for your practice, being here. And now we're going to open it up for some questions, for reflections. And Amanda, you're back with us.
Yes, that was great. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you.
Okay, so if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A panel. So we'll start with one question from Helena. So there's some background. I have a patient who knew severe trauma in her childhood. That base trauma not only leaves her very fearful as a person, but it has left her perennially afraid of being overwhelmed by fear. I find it very hard to help her find any kind of space around that fear that might allow her to begin to experience it in a more accepting capacity that might eventually lead to release. Do you have any advice about how to work on fear when the fear of feeling fear and being overwhelmed by it creates a deep resistance to trying any kind of contemplative practice?
Thank you. And this is from Helena?
Helena.
Helena, great. Thank you, Helena. Yeah, this is something that I care deeply about, because when people are badly hurt, when they suffer from complex trauma, of course, everybody will experience pain and suffering. It's part of the human condition. But some will, especially early in life, experience exceedingly difficult forms of suffering that defy understanding. Because when we suffer in complicated ways, especially very early in life, we don't yet have the ability to reflect. Right? We don't have language fully, and we don't even know we have a mind that can chew on our experience, can think about it, can understand it more fully. So what happens is we have a direct experience without the needed buffers of mind to help us feel a little bit more oriented toward what's happening. And if we're going through something traumatizing, shocking, the body, the autonomic nervous system, has its own way of coping. And one way of coping, and this is something that I've written about for Tricycle, so this will come out soon, is freezing and response. Right? It's one way of trying to survive excessive amounts of pain and suffering. Now, it's helpful because it can provide a way of surviving. But if it becomes a pattern of response to suffering, which can happen, then the tendency is almost automatically to freeze, right? And even if we're freezing in the face of anticipatory fear, anticipatory anxiety. And so I can appreciate your struggle to help someone first just notice the response. It's helpful, right, to not try to get rid of it, but simply to cultivate awareness of it. And then offer ways to, again, appeal to the body. Because consciously, we can sometimes believe that it is the only way to survive, is to freeze. But if the body, again, starts to feel a little more fluid, a little more calibrated, the mind will sometimes follow. Now, psychologically, you can also work with this by just appreciating that some of us have extremely well-developed protector parts. Right? Those are the parts that say, no more pain, never again. And it can take time for those protective parts to begin to settle so that it feels safer, it feels more manageable to begin to find new ways of responding to suffering. The tricky part is that it takes time to develop consolidated ways of dealing with suffering so that people trust they will survive if they don't freeze. They will survive if they utilize those precious resources of reflection, consideration, mindfulness. So I hope that is helpful to you. I know that it can be a lengthy process, and so for you also, the resources of patience, because the pace for healing can sometimes be slow. And if we can hang in there, right, even to notice very subtle shifts, some subtle new capacity to open to suffering or get closer to it, that's something that can be amplified and can reassure people that they have more capacity than they know.
Okay, great. So another question. We have one from Mr. Joseph. Are Tonglen and metta practice related?
Joseph, thank you. Yes, they are related. When we do metta, which is a loving kindness practice, comes out of the Theravadan tradition, where we're basically trying to generate feelings of love, feelings of affection for all beings. And as I was talking about the teachings of equanimity, this is a powerful way of softening, challenging our biases, and also bringing more awareness to who we love more easily and how to nurture that inner feeling of love and affection so that we can tap into it for many, many beings. Now, the flip side of love, in the Buddha Dharma, love is the wish for people to be happy, is compassion, which is the wish for people to be free from suffering. So with metta, we're sending out all of that love, right? The loving kindness. With Tonglen, we are taking in the suffering and then trying to offer out basically metta, right? Whatever would help people feel well, whatever would help people reduce the particular kinds of suffering they're experiencing. And in the Buddha and Dharma, metta, loving kindness, and compassion go together. Right? The wish for people to be well, to be happy, to be free, and the wish for people to be free from all forms of suffering. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay, another question. This one's from, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Lonnie. I'm finding it so hard to not absorb other people's energies, stress, worry, anger, even right after a meditation, and even while being very conscious of my feelings and thoughts, it flows right into me. Do you have any advice?
It's a great question. Interestingly, some people are very, very sensitive and very porous. We all come into this life with certain temperamental proclivities and certain characters. Some people are very sensitive, and clinically that's even known as being a highly sensitive person. And I think it's actually a great gift to be a highly sensitive person because it means you have the capacity to be impacted by what other people are going through. You have the ability to really feel it. Now, the challenge, of course, is if you are with people who are feeling a lot and struggling to support themselves, contain their own experience of feeling. And so if you end up in close proximity to people who are emoting a lot, this is especially true with anxiety, which tends to have a very contagious quality, or anger, which can also have a very contagious quality, and you're highly sensitive, it can be challenging to really nurture a needed psychic boundary. But it is definitely possible. And it's worth just checking to see if there's any part of the mind, any part of the psyche that feels responsible for other people's feelings. Right? Just to see if there's a part that could be unburdened by that feeling or belief. And also check to see if there's a part that needs some support in holding a boundary, and while sustaining feelings of compassion and affection, trusting that other people have resources to manage their own feelings. And this is, of course, really important if we're going through something collective, because right now so many people are suffering extreme levels of anxiety and sorrow and rage, very, very powerful affect. And so there's a balance between letting ourselves really feel and notice what people are experiencing while sustaining those needed boundaries. And I think sometimes the work here is both spiritual and psychological, to cultivate our resources of spaciousness and equanimity, so that we're not feeling too pulled in to other people's experience, but also just checking to see if we have a history of feeling or being responsible, maybe too responsible for what other people are going through. I hope that's helpful to you.
Okay. Another question we have, this one is from Charity. I had a good deal of childhood trauma, which I've done a lot of work on. I'm a successful person in life, but I always feel incomplete. Do I need to try to identify what is going on, or keep with practice in hopes of things feeling more settled in time?
So she has a tendency to feel incomplete.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for the question. The feeling of incompleteness is very, very compelling. And it can also be vexing. It's almost as if there's a sense of some part always missing, some part that we're needing that we're not able to find. I'm going to get myself a lozenge. And Charity, one thing you can try is to check to see if there is some part that's needing a little more airtime. Because when we're traumatized, certain parts of the psyche can go underground. They start to hide. And they do that for good reason. They do it in part because if they were too exposed, they might not survive. And so often when we have that sense of something missing, we might need to access a critically needed and valuable part of ourselves that needs certain conditions to feel like it's safe enough. It's never perfectly safe, but safe enough to be more exposed, to come forward. And so it may not be so much a matter of intellectually understanding this as having experiences in relationship where there's more room for more of who you are. And so that's one possibility to consider. I might also just add that you can bring plenty of compassion to yourself in that sense of something being missing, because again, it generates so much distress, right? Sometimes it can create feelings of hunger, of emotional hunger, trying to get something that we just can't take in. And perhaps as you come to trust that what you're needing is inside you, but is needing conditions, and maybe conditions of relationship, interpersonal conditions, to come forward, to be better known. Slowly, slowly, you'll be able to access what feels like it's missing, right? What's hard to find. And again, in the meantime, I offer the skillful means, the upaya of patience, because again, these dynamics can be very powerful. And sometimes they just require the right opportunity, and maybe especially the right relational opportunity to discover what's there, but carefully hidden.
Okay. I think we have time for about 2 more questions.
Right.
Okay, so here's one from Steven. When I get stressed, my breath becomes super shallow and tight, which makes me even more stressed.
Mm-hmm.
How do I use breath as a space to enter peace in this scenario?
Wonderful question. Breath is the most accessible way to usher in increased feelings of ease. Because you're right, when we're feeling stressed, the heart rate will accelerate. It'll affect our breath. It becomes harder to take in fuller breaths and release fuller exhalations. And so I highly recommend just a few minutes every day, and it can be even a couple times a day, in the morning and in the evening, to find a place that you associate with some feelings of ease. And traditionally, Buddhist practitioners will have a little shrine with imagery that they immediately associate with a sense of being cared for, sense of being loved. So wherever that might be, to bring yourself to that place, perhaps to have an image of the Buddha, or people who offer you inspiration, people whose clarity and integrity you trust. And then just notice where you're experiencing the breath. It might be in the belly or the chest or the nostrils. And without any effort to control the breath, you're just bringing your awareness almost as if it could rest right on the breath. And then you can begin, as we did at the beginning of the Tonglen practice, to do several rounds where you deepen the inhalation and then do some gentle breath holding. It can be 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. Again, very gently, just so you feel a sense of fullness in the belly, before fully and very slowly exhaling. If you do this 4 or 5 times, you will probably notice, and even if it's subtle, an increased feeling of ease. And this is, of course, something that you can do wherever you are. So if you're in an environment where there is acute stress, you can work with the breath just to help your autonomic nervous system feel more regulated. And that will help your mind, that will help your heart also begin to decompress.
All right, and our last question for the session. So this one's from Karen. What are some practical ways to develop our equanimity?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, a very practical way is, and again, there are these two interesting components to equanimity. There's the ability to stay fairly steady mentally, and then there's the ability to recognize that all beings, whether we know them, whether we like them, whether we've had problems with them, all beings have the shared wish to be truly free of our problems, our difficulties, our suffering, and feel restored, feel fulfilled, feel well. And for the first part of equanimity, again, there's nothing like working with the breath and doing 10 or 15 minutes of breath work to help the mind start to drop into the subtler layers of our mind, which from a Buddhist perspective is very spacious, very, very open and clear. And then as we're doing so, as the body's feeling more settled and the mind is starting to follow, we can do meditations on equanimity, metta practice, and tonglen, where we're trying to generate and tap into those feelings of affection and concern, love. First for the people we easily love. It could be a pet, doesn't have to be a human being. Any sentient being that has helped us tap into some trust that we have the capacity to care deeply for another. And then we extend what we're feeling internally to people we don't have any personal affiliation with. And this is, of course, so important, because when we do so, we're going to restore that visceral awareness that we really are part of a human family in which each person, despite striking differences, is informed by this deeply felt visceral need to be well. And then, of course, as we're doing our equanimity practice, to include the people we have problems with, because often the protective parts of the psyche come out with those people to say, basically, you're not like me. We are not connected. And I'm not suggesting that you should have actual physical proximity to people who have harmed you, but to just notice what you're needing internally, what your mind, what your heart is needing to restore that feeling of spaciousness that then generates the love and the compassion for all beings.
Great. That was wonderful. Thank you, Pilar. So I'll give a little short outro and then I'll hand it back to you for any closing remarks. So yeah, thank you, Pilar, for sharing this opportunity with us today. And thank you to everyone who is joining in on the call. We have another online practice next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern with Roshi, Pat, and Kyo O'Hara. So keep checking tricycle.org/live for upcoming session dates and to view all past recordings, including this one. And again, we're providing these sessions for free, so if you want to help support this and our other efforts, please consider donating at tricycle.org/donate. And I wish everyone staying healthy and safe. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you to all of you who are part of this Tricycle Sangha. It occurs to me that we're going through an experience that is providing a kind of enforced retreat. And I'd like to support you all, and I join you all in using this time to reflect, and to reflect as fully and as deeply as we can on how we might be suffering and how we could work with that suffering, respond to it in a way that truly unburdens us. And that as we do so, we use that capacity, that nurtured capacity, for the benefit of as many people as possible, to really let ourselves think about what we're experiencing with deepening curiosity, and to generate some determination to respond however we are able to, with skill, with affection, and with an abiding respect. And so I send you all blessings for your well-being, for your good health, and for the recovery of those you love who might be suffering. And I hope that we will find ways to reconnect in the future as we're navigating this experience and when we come through it. Thank you so much, everyone.